Hello there. It's difficult to think about much else other than coronavirus at the moment. It seems every news bulletin is just full of it. One of the questions, I guess, in people's minds is, when does it all go back to normal? The last few weeks have been seriously weird and seriously difficult. Schools closed, churches closed like ours. One by one, activities that we sort of take for granted being stopped. It's all very, very strange, and it's been hard to deal with. And you can see that people are struggling with this. I think that's why at the weekend people went out in the nice weather, because that's what you normally do. You normally pile down to the park when it's nice, or to the beach. I guess we're wondering, when does it end? When do things return to normal? When can we do the things we used to do? It's strange, all this coming in what we call Holy Week, in the week leading up to Easter, in this week when as Christians our focus is on the last week of what we often call Jesus' earthly life, from when he entered Jerusalem on Palm Sunday through to his death on Good Friday, and then the wonderful news we celebrate of his resurrection, that he rose again. A strange, and I know for many people unbelievable story, but one that we believe somehow in some way to be true. And I guess it sounds like the happy ending. Jesus rose from the dead, so everything is all right again. And if we're going to take a lesson from that for our current situation and this question in our heads, it would be that Jesus rises again and things will get back to normal. That's what we want, isn't it? Things to be all right in the end. Within that story, there's something that says things will be okay in the end. It might get tough, but things will be all right. But I'm not so sure it's that simple, really. I don't think it's just a story of things getting a bit tough, but then working out all right in the end. Things being able to get back to normal. Things don't go back to normal when Jesus rises from the dead. In the stories in the Bible, Jesus' resurrection doesn't make everything back to how it was, just make things all right again after a tragic but brief interlude of shock and sadness. Things are different somehow. Things aren't normal again. Jesus acts in very different ways, suddenly appearing in a locked room, people not being sure if he was a ghost or not, of 1 second being in one place and then suddenly disappearing and appearing in another place. There's a sense in the stories that yes, Jesus is back and reunited with his disciples, but they're not quite the same as they were before. In fact, in some of the stories, they don't even recognise Jesus. Mary Magdalene in John's Gospel famously thinks he's the gardener until he calls her name. So is it just a case of things going back to normal? Is that all that Jesus' resurrection means? Is it just pressing the reset button or switching off and back on again so that you can clear out the bad stuff and make it work again? I don't think so. Because the big story in the Bible isn't just Jesus died and rose again and that's fantastic for him. It's not even Jesus died and rose again and that means we'll see our loved ones who've gone from us one day, although that is true. Jesus' death and resurrection set in train what the Bible calls a whole new creation, the beginning of the world being made good and new and right. Everything can now change, everything can be different and immeasurably better than it was. Now, in the midst of coronavirus outbreak, and even before that with all the problems we face, perhaps we sort of scratch our head and think, really? Is our world really being made new and good and right? Are you sure? Because in case you haven't seen, things are quite bad out there. And the Bible doesn't shy away from that. But it does say that in the struggle, in the suffering, God is there. God's work that began with Jesus won't stop, can't be stopped by anything in the world. The book of Revelation is kind of forbidden territory for many of us. There be dragons. Scary stuff in places, but that scary stuff has a point. And the point isn't about monsters and beasts and 666 and Armageddon and all the rest of it. The point is to Christians who are facing real struggles, real persecution from the might of the Roman Empire, God will see them through. More than that, God will remake the world to be good and new and right, with not a tear left in people's eyes. That's the story. It's not things getting back to normal. It's things being new. Everything wrong being made right. The whole world being made new and right. And bring that back to our present situation and that question in our heads. Will things be normal again? Probably they won't. Probably things will be different forever because of what we've gone through. Our experiences will change us and shape us. And yes, a lot of things will look something like they did before. But I've got a feeling that a lot of things will be different. The question is, will they be different for the better or for the worse? The hope of Easter is that they'll be different for the better, because God can change things, even the very worst things, for the better. But part of it also lies in our hands. Only God can do this work of new creation. That's his job, not ours. But maybe we can be part of it in our own little way. Maybe this experience of lockdown, of suffering and struggle, maybe they can teach us things, teach us about what's valuable in our lives, in our communities, in our world. Maybe they can help us to remember the people who are valuable, the key workers who we've gone out and applauded and made a right noise about, whom people have paid petrol money for, people who've given up their place in the supermarket queue or whatever. As we've seen the pictures earlier on in the crisis of people stockpiling, maybe we can ask ourselves, what's important? What do I really need? We've been forced to embrace a much different, for many people, slower way of life. I know that for key workers, particularly people in the NHS, the opposite has been true. And we pray for them and hold them before God. But for many of us, when schools have closed, when our work has closed, we've been forced to take things slower. And maybe that could be good for us in some way. Maybe there's something from that we can take. Nature, many people have said, has been flourishing during all this. How can we keep that when things start to return to normal? And maybe our enforced isolation from our friends and families, and the experience of those who were even more isolated than before, can help us to work out what's important, who's important, what really matters in my life. And by answering those questions, tough as they may be, we can begin with God to reshape things. I don't know whether you believe in the story of the resurrection of Jesus or not. For me, this story matters. It's important. It's the hope that I and many others hold on to, particularly in our struggles. But whether you believe it or not, how can we make things not just back to normal, but how can we bring something new and good and better than before out of the tragedy and the struggle and the pain and the isolation of this lockdown? Stay safe, stay well, stay at home if you can, and God bless you, and I'll see you soon.